Thank you very much for supporting this meeting today. This is the third meeting organised by the Labour Campaign for Free Speech for the defence of David Miller and for academic freedom and free speech. And I'll start by quoting again from the University College Union 2016. One of the purposes of post-compulsory education is to serve the public interest through extending knowledge and understanding and fostering critical thinking and expression for staff and students, and then in society more widely. Academic freedom is essential to achieving these ends and therefore to the development of a civilised democracy. We are today at a crucial point in the struggle for academic freedom. Professor David Miller's sacking from the University of Bristol demonstrates this very clearly. David has long been a critic of the state of Israel and those that lobby for it, but the QC opinion to the university explicitly determined that David had no case to answer with regard to anti-Semitism, upon which the University of Bristol, to its shame, reverted to an accusation of did not meet the standards of behaviour expected of our staff. As Jewish Voice for Labour said this week, David Miller has been dismissed because enough powerful people have made the university too frightened to stick to its principles. David says that the decision to fire him was taken under pressure from the Israel lobby. The organisations lobbying against David include the Board of Deputies of British Jews, the Zionist Federation, the Jewish Labour Movement, and the Community Security Trust. In February, Israel itself also got involved, using one of its online troll factories to flood social media with calls for David to be fired. And appallingly, the all-party parliamentary group against anti-Semitism wrote to the university 4 times calling for David to be sacked, alleging him to be a threat to Jewish students and who had brought the university into disrepute. Let us be clear, David has never spoken against Jewish students. He has called out the Bristol Jewish Society, which is a member of the Union of Jewish Students, which is affiliated to the World Zionist Organization. The UJS is an organization dedicated to opposing free speech on Palestine and Zionism. One of the chief protagonists in the campaign against David, that infamous promoter of fake news, the Jewish Chronicle, headlined this week with the ominous, Miller's sacking should be the beginning, not the end. At the same time as saying that Bristol University's behaviour was disgraceful, as they had chosen to employ somebody representative of a school of thought embedded in almost every part of academia. The implications of this decision are grave. It has a chilling effect on academics across the country and internationally. It seems that the pro-Israel lobby is now going after people via their employers, threatening people's reputations and livelihoods. We have to act before it is too late, and that's what this meeting is about. Before we move on to the speakers, I want to draw to your attention a number of things that you can start to do. The first is a petition, which is on change.org, which you can sign and share with everybody that you think will be prepared to support it. The second is a public statement with background information to David's case that you can use in discussion with people and share with people. And the third is a letter to the university for academics and public intellectuals to sign. And it will be published when we have enough weight of signatories. So again, if you're in that category, then please sign and share it. So now to our speakers. Our speakers come from different backgrounds, including music, activism, academic life, and the UCU trade union. Each will speak to their perspective on David's case on academic freedom and free speech. We will then take contributions from the floor. First of all, we're going to hear from our comrade David Miller. So Professor David Miller, you're going to tell us what all of this is about. Thank you, and over to you.
I've been involved in doing research on propaganda, for decades now. I've been doing work on Zionism, especially for 10 years, I first started doing work on Zionism in the aftermath of the Iraq War in 2009, when we did work on the expansion of the neoconservative movement into the UK. And it was the first time that I was accused of being an anti-Semite, was in 2009, because of that work on neoconservatives. And many of the same people who started to accuse me then, wrongly and defamatorily, of being an anti-Semite have continued to do so to the day. So I've had a lot of experience doing research on this, empirical research on this, and produced quite a substantial evidence base on the role of the Israel lobby of the Zionist movement more generally in the context also of the Israeli government. And it's that work which has caused the Zionist movement to attack me. And they have attacked me, as I said, for more than 10 years. What we find when we look at this kind of activity is that this is a part of a playbook. This is a part of a series of standard techniques which are used by the Israel lobby to attempt to squash any dissent that there is on Palestinian human rights. The particular issue which led to me being sacked just the other day was that I arrived at the University of Bristol in late 2018. And in 2019, in February, I gave a lecture on Islamophobia, where I talked about the 5 pillars of Islamophobia, the idea that there are 5 key organizations and groupings which push the Islamophobia, the first one being the counterterrorism apparatus of the state, which is the primary engine pushing disadvantage and discrimination against Muslims. But that one of the other 4 social movements pushing Islamophobia was parts of the Zionist movement. And this is a thing I've talked about in many places, in public and in lectures. And as a result of that, it seems 2 students in my class complained anonymously to the Community Security Trust, who complained to the university. The university rejected the complaint because they were not a student, so they couldn't have a complaint. So the Community Security Trust then approached the Union of Jewish Students in London, who approached the Bristol JSOC, the Bristol Jewish Society, to sign a letter of complaint against me. And that's where this all started. Let's be clear about this. The UJS and the JSOC were effectively lobbied to bring a complaint against me. The student who made the complaint at the University of Bristol was not a student of mine, has never been to any of my classes, has never spoken to me. But nevertheless, they were able to put this complaint in, and this complaint went through the process from April 2019. It was rejected, first of all, by the university. There was an appeal. The complaint was paused while the university decided if it was going to introduce the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which it duly did. The complaint was then reactivated, and the QC was appointed to investigate whether I had made any comments which were anti-Semitic, and he concluded on every count that I had not made any statements which engaged the question of anti-Semitism or of racism against Jews, of course, as you would expect, because I haven't ever. And so that was a series of almost 2 years where there was a campaign against me to remove me from the University of Bristol. Now, people don't really know about this history because I wasn't allowed to talk about it. I was told that it had to be confidential, and I couldn't talk about it, and I wasn't even allowed to reveal that I had been cleared of all complaints in relation to anti-Semitism, and indeed all complaints that were put against me. So there's been this 2 year, almost 3 year period now where I've been relentlessly attacked by the JSOC, yes, by the UGS, by the CST, and by a whole range of other Zionist organizations, as Esther has mentioned. And so what we see here is a campaign of harassment and of bullying of me as an individual academic, which has in the end been successful. And I want to put it like that because quite often what happens in the discussion of this is that it starts off with the statements that I made on the 13th of February this year about being attacked and complained about by the UGS and by the JSOC itself. That's not where it started. It started, as I said, almost 3 years ago. And my statement that I'd been attacked and complained about was a factual statement. It wasn't a statement which was secret. It had already been put into the public domain by the complainants from the UGS and the JSOC that I was, that they had made the complaint against me. So it wasn't a secret. It was a matter of public knowledge, and it was true. But nevertheless, this has been interpreted as me somehow attacking or targeting, quote, Jewish students, when actually what I was doing was simply factually reporting that these particular individuals who are at the head of the JSOC and the UGS, both of which are Zionist organizations, I was simply reporting that that's a fact. And then I went on to make other statements about Zionism and the need to end Zionism. And let's just be clear about that. What I'm talking about there is Zionism as a political ideology, the ideology that the Jews have special rights in what was called Palestine, and that the Palestinians should be removed, as they were indeed in the Nakba in 1948, when 750,000 of them were forced out of their homes, and then indeed again in further waves of ethnic cleansing in 1967 when the territories were occupied, and indeed, of course, as we know, and everyone saw in the world from May this year, the ongoing ethnic cleansing of Sawan, of Sheikh Jarrah, and other parts of occupied East Jerusalem and the West Bank. So there's been an ongoing campaign against me, and this is not just about me as someone who has particular views or who does research which maybe other people don't share an interest in. This is me as a representative of many other people who've also had similar attacks against them, and it will not stop with me. As people said in relation to the attacks on the Labour left under Corbyn, people thought that if they just got rid of someone like Jackie Walker or Chris Williamson or Mark Wadsworth or Tony Greenstein or whoever else was the next victim of the witch hunt, maybe that would stop it, and the Zionist movement would stop. It would stop its campaigning. But if we just sacrificed a few people and we moved further up the hill, of course that didn't happen, and it ended up with, as we know, with Corbyn still being suspended from the Parliamentary Labour Party and the Labour Party effectively a prisoner of the Zionist movement and the Israeli state. And that's what they want to do with every other public institution in this country and indeed in other countries. So what we see now is the move on to higher education to try and to discipline higher education. I'm a victim. There have been many other victims that people perhaps are not aware of, and there will be many more after me. And as Esther said, the Jewish Chronicle has stated this, that it is now, once it's got rid of one crank, by which it means me, they will go after the rest, and that's anyone who supported me and on down the hill to anyone that supports them and anyone that supports them. So I see this as being an indication of the threats that we're faced, that academic freedom is faced with in this country. I mean, the work that I have done is empirically grounded, is effectively social science, a social scientific approach to understanding the Zionist movement. And if we can't do research and report its results, then science hasn't got any possibility of existing. And it means that we will have systematically distorted understanding of how conflicts operate in the society. And let me just finish off by saying something about Zionism and the importance of talking about Zionism. Quite a lot I hear people say, let's just talk about apartheid Israel. Let's just talk about the state of Israel and its human rights abuses and its crimes. And yes, we should be talking about that. And we should be shouting that from the rooftops. But let's also be clear that those crimes cannot continue to exist without the support movement which the Israeli government has in countries around the world where there is an active Zionist movement. And in this country, there is an active Zionist movement, and it has power. It doesn't have power by definition because the people who are probably involved in it might or might not be used, and that's not always the case. It has power because it is politically active and organized. It doesn't have the power because by definition it has the power which we can empirically interrogate. So my approach to this would be say we don't know how powerful the Israeli lobby is or the Zionist movement is, but we can go about doing empirical investigations of particular issues. In my case, the power in this particular example doesn't lie with me. It doesn't lie with me in relation to my students. The alleged power of a professor over harmless and powerless first-year students. The power resides with the Israeli state and with the Zionist lobby and the Zionist movement. And it's the same. We can do the same kind of calculations with other questions. Who was it that was behind the anti-Semitism panic in relation to the Labour Party? Who takes these decisions? What organizations are involved? And we can set that out. We can set out empirically what kind of organizations are involved in that. We can come to decisions about or conclusions about the relative power in particular cases of the Zionist lobby or the Zionist movement. So I would advocate, that we need to face that there is such a thing, an actually existing set of organizations which is called the Zionist movement. It's a formal set of organizations And we need to recognize that it's the enemy of proper discussion of the Palestinian question and indeed of human rights more generally. It's not something we can deal with by just talking about the Israeli state. We have to talk about Zionism. And I know some people on the left want to shy away from that and think it's a mistake. On the contrary, Zionism has to be faced, and Zionism as an ideology has to be dismantled, to use the term used by the University of Bristol in their statement on Black Lives Matter when they're talking about racism. Zionism is a form of racism and it needs to be dismantled. And we on the British left cannot hope to move towards socialism unless and until we've also helped to dismantle Zionism. And that's what I would say is the vision of the future.
Thank you, David. Your work is so very, very important. Thank you for that. And we'll hear more about different perspectives on the issues that you describe. Next, we're going to Moshé Machover. Moshé is a mathematician, philosopher, and social activist. He was a founder in Israel of Matzpen, the revolutionary socialist and anti-Zionist organization. Moshé, it's good to see you again. Over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting me to speak on this. I think it is an important issue and much broader than the specific case of David Miller, who should be supported, and even more general than the specific case of the Zionist lobby. The sacking of David Miller has a paradoxical effect, or the paradoxical implication of tending to support his allegations, for which he apparently was sacked. If you think about it, what happened to him is an illustration, or it tends to provide evidence for what he claimed in his research. But you don't have to agree with his statements or with his views in order to support him. It's a much wider issue. It is an issue of principle, of freedom of speech in general, and academic freedom in the specific context of academia. So in this sense, it is a general issue and goes far beyond the personal case of David Miller. It is also, in my view, an illustration, or it should be seen that it goes beyond the power, as it were, of the Zionist lobby. I think it is becoming more and more obvious that the power of the Zionist lobby derives from the service it renders to the British establishment. The same thing has happened to the same campaign that we are witnessing here, and that was illustrated and demonstrated in the what happened with Jeremy Corbyn, takes place also in countries where there is very little Zionist organization. And I think we should understand this. This is my view. It is a broader issue. It is not the case that the Zionist lobby and the Israel advocacy groups have a lot of power in themselves. They have an apparent power because they are supported and play a role in the service of the British establishment. And I want to explain this. This is. I mean, it is natural for David Miller, who focuses with the subject of his research is the Zionist lobby, to focus on it, and maybe not to focus on what lies behind it. But what lies behind it is the fact that it is rendering a service, voluntary service, and in fact, enthusiastic service to the British state, and the interest of the British state is a part of its role in the service of the so-called special relationship with the United States. So we are concerned here with things that lie far beyond the mere Israeli state or its advocacy groups in this or that country. The role of Britain in this special relationship is to be a camp follower of the United States and to defend the strategic interests of its boss, its major ally, the United States. This is seen in all sorts of cases which have nothing to do specifically with Israel. But in the case of Israel, the importance is to support the position of the United States, for whom Israel is a strategic ally. So you are not allowed to criticize Israel because Israel is a vital ally of the United States, both regionally in the Middle East and more widely. Therefore, Israel itself is sacrosanct, and the organizations that are advocating for Israel are also sacrosanct, and you mustn't touch them. And I think this is evident in what David has just said, that the campaign started in connection with the Iraq invasion. The invasion of Iraq was not particularly in the interest of I mean, the United States did not invade Iraq, and the British establishment did not support the invasion because of Israeli influence. That has nothing to do with it. Still, if you opposed the invasion of Iraq, then you were targeted. And I predict that if this sacking succeeds, then we shall see that the British establishment will use similar tactics in cases that are not at all connected with Zionism or Israel. It will become generalized. Any expression of non-conventional or non-establishment views will be targeted using similar methods. So this is much broader than the issue of David Miller personally, or however important it is. It is much broader than the issue of even of Zionism in Israel. It is a question fundamentally of the right to free speech generally, and specifically the sacrosanct principle of academic freedom, which is being eroded and targeted in this case. And this is the thin end, or the not anymore thin part of the wedge. It is a danger to the whole of British society. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that analysis, Moshé. We're dealing with big issues here. Natalie's going to speak about the conflation of anti-Semitism with criticism of Israel and how to resist it. Natalie is a Palestine solidarity activist who served as a human rights monitor in Hebron in 2018. She's the co-founder of Jersey Palestine Solidarity Campaign and has been a consistent resistor of the Labour Party witch hunt. Respect and solidarity to you, Natalie. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a huge privilege to be here today. First of all, I just want to publicly state my support, obviously, for David. I find it really difficult at times to articulate the level of anger and disgust I feel when I see another decent human falling victim to this disgusting witch hunt and what is our generation's McCarthyism. I also want to take the time to state my solidarity with our non- and anti-Zionist Jewish comrades, some who were literal descendants of Holocaust survivors who have been put in the unforgivable position of needing to defend themselves from disgusting accusations of anti-Semitism. And we need to take a moment to think about what that means and how the Israel lobby have created the situations where Jews who do not support their racist ideology of Zionism have, for all intents and purposes, been designated as the wrong kind of Jew. Is there a more disgusting example of anti-Semitism than the Israel lobby itself, who, rather than looking to the rich history of Jews, standing with the oppressed rather than the oppressor, want to forever connect the Jewish community with an ideology of white supremacy, which, let's not forget, is supported by the likes of Tommy Robinson and Katie Hopkins. So I just want to make something abundantly clear. Anti-Semitism, of course, as with all forms of racism, including anti-Palestinian racism, is abhorrent. We know that in its ugliest and most dangerous form resulted in the genocide of 6 million Jews, and there is no place for it in our society. But now that I've made that clear, we need to move on to the subject that really needs to be discussed here, which is the conflation of anti-Semitism in Israel and how we must resist it. Some of you will know that I referred myself to the Labour's compliance unit for anti-Semitism, and in my referral, I stated that Israel is a racist endeavour and was from its inception. And I really don't care if that offends some people. And you know why? Because what is far more offensive to any human of conscience is that Israel was and continues to be built on the razing and destruction of hundreds of Palestinian villages, of the massacres of unarmed men, women, and children, of ethnic cleansing, the creating of hundreds of thousands of refugees, of apartheid and incremental genocide. You know that it's not only historical records that prove this, it's not only the video footage that we can see that proves this, not the countless UN reports and those from numerous human rights organizations that evidence this, but it's also something that I've seen with my own eyes when I served as a human rights monitor in Hebron in 2018. To claim that this disgusting settler colonialist state is in any way connected to Jewish identity is just disgraceful. And I really recommend, if people haven't watched it yet, to look at Electronic Intifada's latest YouTube video, which talks about how anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. So we need to ask ourselves, why is it that the Israel lobby pulls out the anti-Semitism trump card when anybody criticizes Israel? Well, because fortunately, we still at this moment live in a time where, for the most part, the general public, for the general public, stating that you're a white supremacist who wants someone else's land really isn't going to cut it as an argument. The Israel lobby has no arguments, and thus it resorts to name calling. This is just an attempt to distract people from the real issue, which we know is racist settler colonialism. So how do we resist it? Well, I think one of the things, I've stated this several times, is it begins with us as ordinary people not fearing the labels that people might try to apply to us. We need to understand that labels can only hold the power that we give to them. Of course, for the likes of David, and I believe that Stephen's Slater is talking later, of course, those labels and relentless attacks have had real life-changing consequences for them, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But, you know, for the most part, it really isn't that drastic for most of us. It really is just name calling. And the antidote for that is to recognize that fact and not to cower in the face of these accusations. We must refuse to censor ourselves as Palestinians face bombs, as Palestinians face snipers, as Palestinians face an attempt to completely erase them and their history from the region. We just need to understand and just really think about that it is nothing more than a distraction to change the subject from the suffering of Palestinians living under Israeli apartheid to another form of racism, and we need to stop going down that road. I think the second form of resistance is really that we double down on our efforts, on our actions. We keep using our voices and the platforms that we have available to us to amplify the voices of the Palestinians. Now, returning to the witch hunt, of course, solidarity is important. And I think when I say that, it's important that we stand in solidarity with every victim each and every time something like this happens. And also, if our situation allows, I think it's really important that if we can, we support the fight with any material resources. My personal view on the subject is that we really need, as much as possible, to drag the Israel lobby into the public arena, into the cold light of day, and whenever it is viable, to take legal action. I think we really need to recognise the power that we have as ordinary people, because we have the truth on our side. It is just about being brave enough to use that power. And that's one of the things I suppose I attempted to do just as a very ordinary person when I referred myself to the Labour Compliance Unit. That was something that was in my power to do, to fight the conflation. I just felt it was a way that I could stand in solidarity with the Palestinians, but also with the victims of the witch hunt. And you know what? I was never suspended from Labour for it. And not because I didn't violate the IHRA, because I made damn sure that I did. And my personal view is that the reason for this is because they didn't want to make a martyr out of me. I also think we need to look a lot more about how do we get this message out more widely into our communities, and the use of things, or increase the use of things like subverts, but also obviously educational sessions like this, which really help equip people with the tools that they need in order to continue with the fight. I remember at a PSC meeting, AGM, a few years ago, it was highlighted that we cannot allow the Israel lobby to dictate the terrain on which we fight for Palestinians. It was relating to not focusing on the witch hunt. But I think we need to revisit this, because I just think, given where we are in the stream of time, that we can no longer afford to ignore the perniciousness of the lobby and the dangerous precedents it sets, which Moshé referred to before. If they win this war against freedom of speech, it will be open season for any subject or cause that special interest groups want to keep out of public discourse. We may not have chosen this terrain to fight on, but that does not mean that we do not fight on it. And we should not forget or never believe that we cannot win. We must never forget that international law is on our side, that morality is on our side, and that the truth is on our side. And we must expose the Israel lobby for the bullies that they are. And what I would like to say alongside that is we should never forget that people don't like bullies in general. The public don't like bullies. Whether they're interested in Palestine or not is irrelevant. And we know that because there are so many successful movies where they have underdogs, which you almost universally root for. At a time when the far right is on the ascendancy, when corporate fascism has made its way into our society, as we witness ecological breakdown, I really don't believe that there has been a more dangerous time in human history. And we really need to recognise that. We must recognise that we need to resist and do everything we can to resist the shutting down of freedom of speech, and to prevent our communities from being dragged down a path that, let's face it, nobody will benefit from. So we know that David Miller is just one of a number in recent years who've been targeted, but there are going to be many more, and it really is time for us to stand up and really build our resistance.
Thank you, Natalie. I love that thing that you said, that we did not choose this terrain, but we must fight on it. And clearly solidarity is all. Thank you so much. Now we have to speak to Earth Loki, who's going to speak in defense of David. Loki, as I'm sure you know, is a British Iraqi rapper and activist, and it's really good to see you here this evening. Thank you, Loki.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak today. It is an honor to speak in support of David. Now, David was cleared by the Bristol University's QC-led investigation of anything, of any violation of the Equality Act 2010. He was cleared of any racist charges, but yet he was fired. What has happened to him is an extension of the type of thinking that led to the Palestinian Prisoners Studies Center reporting that between 2015 and 2018, over 500 Palestinians, among them children, were arrested by the Israeli state for activity on social media. He is guilty of largely quoting the very organizations that have campaigned for his removal, merely quoting their own tax filings, their own websites, and their own public pronouncements. So, for example, the very first issue that he was organized against on by CST, and then they had to pass it to the UJS, was the involvement of Zionist organizations in the Islamophobia industry. This is empirical and well documented. Sarah Marusek found that 75% of the organizations that fund the Islamophobia industry and the think tanks involved with it also fund the building of Israeli settlements in clear contravention of international law. When we look at who is the most iconic figure of Islamophobia in this country, it's Tommy Robinson, without a doubt. Tommy Robinson was funded by the Middle East Forum. The director of the Middle East Forum is Greg Roman, a former employee of the Israeli Ministry of Defense and the Foreign Ministry. Tommy Robinson was also employed by the David Horowitz Freedom Center as a Robert Shillman scholar. Robert Shillman was on the board of directors for the Friends of the IDF and also funds the Jewish National Fund, which builds illegal settlements in the West Bank. Robinson went to the West Bank in the Israeli-occupied Syrian Golan Heights, posed on the back of an IDF tank and said he would publicly fight for Israel in war. Katie Hopkins also was employed by the David Horowitz Freedom Center and has publicly advocated for the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. Now, the very same organizations that fund the Middle East Forum and the David Horowitz Freedom Center also fund the settler group Elad in the West Bank, who are currently cleansing Silwan and Sheikh Jarrah of Palestinian inhabitants. The Middle East Forum's work as a think tank was quoted 13 times by Anders Breivik in his manifesto. Sheldon Adelson, the biggest funder of Israeli settlements, also funded many different Islamophobic groupings. This is well documented and can clearly be discerned by looking at the tax filings of the very organizations that we are speaking about. It's not a conspiracy theory. What about the Union of Jewish Students? It is constitutionally a pro-Israeli organization. It is a member of the World Union of Jewish Students, which is part of the World Zionist Organization, meaning it has representation at the World Zionist Organization. It receives funding from the Israeli embassy. Its chief executive is Aria Miller, who was previously the head of digital media and Jewish community relations at the Embassy of Israel in the United Kingdom. It has a few programs which act as a gateway through which members of the UJS can become part of the IDF. It has something called the Massa Journey Program, which directs students towards Garin Tazabo, a particular program that enlists foreign nationals into the IDF. According to the IDF, it has helped over 1,500 teens from all around the world enlist in the military. And it is estimated that 70% of those that get into the IDF through these programs stay on after their service. Also, it directs people through the Massa Journey program to Marva. Now, that's an organization that takes children from the Israeli state and trains them with M16s with live ammunition in the Naqab Desert on the Gadna base. That also is something that people that come through this Massa program, that people can come through the UJS to take part in, also join and become assimilated into. Students that are part of the UJS can become what is called an Israel Campus Fellow. What does that mean? Well, according to the UJS's own website, becoming an Israel Campus Fellow means you get, quote unquote, exclusive access to top speakers. You get access to resources that help you facilitate Israel-related events. You can, quote unquote, be the leader for national and sometimes international Israel campaigns. You've even seen a pipeline of those in important positions within the UJS go on to have important positions within the Israeli state. For instance, the former campaign director, Yair Zevan, went on to be the press officer for the IDF and later the international media coordinator for Shimon Peres as president of Israel. We also know that it works closely with BICOM, which is a part of the Israel lobby, an essential part of the Israel lobby. We also know that there are 7,000, according to IDF sources, 7,000 lone soldiers within the Israeli army. Those are people who are not Israeli citizens, but serve in the IDF nonetheless. And an organization like the UJS, through the Massa Journey program and where it directs members of this union towards, are basically part of the facilitation of an infrastructure of violence towards the indigenous population, the Palestinians. Now, who else militated against David Miller? Our former housing minister, Robert Jenrick, has said that he wrote repeatedly to Bristol University seeking Professor David Miller's dismissal from the job. Now, Robert Jenrick describes Aidan Ofer, a Tory donor, as a close family friend. Now, who is Aidan Ofer? His brother, his father, and his nephew have all run the company Zodiac Maritime Limited. Now, it's registered in this country. Zodiac Maritime Limited and the Ofer family shipping company, according to the Sunday Times in 2011, was being used, quote unquote, to ferry elite Israeli forces for operations inside Iran. It was the shipping company that moved people using foreign passports, agents for the Israeli state, into Dubai to carry out the killing of the Hamas member Mabhouh in a hotel room. Zodiac Maritime Limited is a front for Israeli intelligence. Aidan Ofer is part of that family. Now, that, as far as I'm concerned, is a clear correlation between what Robert Jenrick has sought to do and his relationships with seriously, seriously dangerous and suspicious figures. Look at the Community Security Trust, who originally tried to bring this charge against David when he was pointing out the links between Islamophobia and Zionist organizations that fund settlements in the West Bank. Well, Anthony Lehrman, the founder of the Institute for Jewish Policy Research, has said that CST volunteers have received training from Israel's external intelligence service. It was founded by Gerald Ronson. Gerald Ronson, a very close friend of Benjamin Netanyahu, funded his political campaign. And actually, if you look at Peter Oborn's brilliant 2009 documentary about the Israel lobby in this country, he recalls a meeting at the house of the Israeli ambassador with the president of the Board of Deputies, with Gerald Ronson, the founder of the Community Security Trust, and Pojo Zlebludovic, who's the founder of BICOM. Now, they are raging about an article in The Guardian which compares the state of Israel to apartheid South Africa. So who do they decide to send to Alan Rusbridger to confront him, the editor of The Guardian at that time? They send Gerald Ronson and the president of the Board of Deputies. Rusbridger said of this meeting, their pitch was that The Guardian was encouraging anti-Semitism and that this article was an incitement of violence against Jewish people. So quite clearly you see here that the Board of Deputies, who have not been pulled up anywhere in the media on the fact that in their own trustees' report, following the bringing down of Jeremy Corbyn, put the following sentences. They have a close, and this is according to their trustees' report, not me. They have a close working relationship with the Embassy of Israel in the UK. They have strengthened links with the Ministry of Strategic Affairs, whose sole purpose is combating BDS, and with the IDF. Now, no one in the media has problematized this about the Board of Deputies. What we also know about the Community Security Trust is that they are recipients of about £14 million a year of taxpayer money. They've been intimately involved in the campaign against Corbyn. Also, we've also seen Mishcon Direya, a key part of the anti-BDS campaign and the campaign against Corbyn, advising the UJS on how to bring down David Miller. Now, what's happened to David is clear and would be clearer if on a societal level, we had some type of literacy about the way organizations run influence campaigns. It's time for us to stop beating around the bush. Thousands upon thousands of people have been thrown out the window over this period, okay? We've seen over 120,000 people leave the Labour Party, whether they've been kicked out on spurious charges, whether they have left by their own volition following the bringing down of Corbyn. Let's stop beating about the bush. Let's stop triangulating. Let's stop obfuscating. And let's be clear about this influence campaign that has been run. Because at the same time, organizations were pushing to bring down David Miller, one of many, you also saw the UK Lawyers for Israel and the Board of Deputies editing textbooks that would be used in schools on this issue of Palestine. You also see other organizations pushed into schools really with the purpose of normalizing Zionist apartheid and colonization of Palestine. We have to be clear about this. We have to be honest about this.
I can hear lots of virtual applause there, low-key. So Natalie talked about shining a light on what was going on when we had a massive spotlight there. That was really excellent. Thank you so much. And lots of people have been saying that they want to listen to it again because obviously there was so much information there. Thank you very much, low-key. Next, we have Ghada, and I hope Ghada's got sound now on the importance of free speech and academic freedom. Ghada is a former research fellow at the Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies at the University of Exeter.
First of all, so much of what has been said is not only excellent, but honestly, it expresses so much of what I would have wanted to say, that almost in a way I feel I'm surplus to requirements. Really, talk after talk has dealt with very important aspects of this problem. Okay, let me put in my few sentences. See, from where I'm sitting, Moshé may well be right, and indeed it is it's an opinion that has been voiced by a number of intellectuals, most prominently Noam Chomsky, that the Israel lobby is not the same as, or in our case, the UK, doing what it does. It's actually not an establishment, but the imperialist policies of the United States, the imperialist nature of the United States, which uses Israel for its own ends. But you see, that may be true, and it's certainly a topic for discussion. But for Palestinians, it doesn't matter what these Zionists are doing, whatever they're doing for, and whoever it is that's using them. As far as Palestinians are concerned, they have been on the receiving end of a relentless campaign by the Zionists to obliterate them. And I really mean to obliterate them physically, their history, their geography, their memory, their narration, and that's what this is about. With David Miller, David Miller is the sacrifice for what this policy on the part of the Zionists has been about. If the Zionists can succeed in deleting the Palestinians as any kind of political, social, cultural force, then they will feel very much better about the story of Israel. I've watched them fight, struggle for legitimacy all the time since before 1948 to try and convince the world that they are legitimate, that they are a natural part of the landscape, and that there are no indigenous people, there are no Palestinians. Now, of course, with time and the changing situation in the world, what has happened is very bad news for the Zionists, because what's happened is that there is a greater and a rising growth, popular support for the Palestinians in Europe, in this country, and very particularly in the United States. Now, when we say this, of course, we're not talking about masses. We're speaking in relative terms. It's been very striking and very noticeable that at the popular level, not at the official level, in many Western countries, the Palestinians have won the support of the masses. Now, that's something that had to be resisted by the Zionists, which is what's happened all along in the story, at every stage in the history of recent history of Palestine. If you like, mirrored in my own life story, at every point when Palestinians looked as if they were going to break through the wall of silence, Israel was there, ready with a new weapon to use. So I need hardly tell you that in this instance, at this point in time, Israel feels threatened, feels the need to shape the debate, institutions of learning. They're vital because those are the places where discussion, debate, analysis takes place. And this cannot be allowed to happen with regard to Israel and the Palestinians. So they've used a variety of techniques, many of them very well known to you. And of course, Israel had a masterstroke in making the state of Israel equivalent to the Jewish people. Brilliant. Because of course it follows.
Ghada, can I just ask you to turn your video off because we might be able to hear you better?
One masterstroke that Israel was able to do, and that has dictated the pace of events now, is it from the beginning, it equated the state of Israel with the Jewish people. So therefore, if you criticize the state, by definition, you are criticizing the Jewish people, and by definition, you are anti-Semitic. This technique of making an equivalence between a political entity, a state, and a group of people has served Israel extremely well. And hence, as you know, the weaponization of anti-Semitism, which is standing in for anti-Zionism, and the technique of shooting the messenger. You don't get the message. The point is you've got to get rid of the messenger. And David Miller is a case in point. Doesn't matter what he's saying, he has to be gone. Now, what I want to end up on saying, what are we going to do about this? You know, I sometimes get a feeling of weariness when I talk about Palestine, Israel, when I hear about Palestine, Israel, because so many aspects of this dreadful story have been gone through. They've been talked about. They've been analyzed. Israel's brutality, its evil actions, its apartheid nature, all of this is talked about. But what are we going to do really to stop this terrible situation in which people are sacrificed, actual people are sacrificed, their reputations, their careers, their livelihoods, and in the case of Palestinians, under occupation, of course, their lives for this state. Well, I can only echo what has been said before very well by other people. First of all, we have to continue to publicize, tell the story, tell the facts, and tell it as it is. You know, for a long time, I was subject to a way of thinking that you shouldn't speak too strongly about Israel or about the Zionists because it upsets this or that group and they won't hear your message. So if, say, you said something which could be interpreted as being, let's say, critical of Jews as Jews or express Jew hatred, you must cut that right out because it will upset certain people and will alienate others. But you see, we've got to stop this. We actually have to tell the story as it is in all its ugliness. We have to expose Israel in all its ugliness, and we have to publicize it widely. If we do that, and at the same time, we support the attempt to have the Palestinian voice present every time, as much as possible. In that way, through the Palestinian voice, I would insist. That is how you keep the debate going. That is how you continue the search for what to do with the Palestinian voice. And it is crucial that it is heard. And I'm grateful for the meeting this evening, for giving me the chance to have my voice heard, even if you can't see and hear me at the same time.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ghada. So we need to publicise and we need to tell the story like it is, the same theme coming through. Thank you very much, Ghada. I understand you're in Jordan, so it's great that you could join us. So our final speaker, before we move on to contributions from the floor, is Huda Ammori, who is going to talk about David's case and about Palestine. Huda is a British Palestinian and co-founder of the solidarity group Palestine Action, which launched at the end of July 2020. Welcome, Huda, over to you.
Hi, thank you for inviting me to speak on this. And I just want to start off by sending my full solidarity to David Miller. As you mentioned, I am a British Palestinian and I'm also Iraqi. My father was forced out with brutal force by the Israeli military. In fact, he was sitting in the front room of his house when the Israeli soldiers came and started shooting into their home, where him and his younger brothers were forced to crawl out the back of their house with just the clothes that they had on at the time. They managed to make it to some caves and stayed there for several days and eventually made their way over to Iraq. Now, this is one of the, I guess, softer stories of Palestinians in the Palestinian diaspora, because every Palestinian you speak to will have a story that roots back to Israel's apartheid regime. This is just the facts of the situation and what Israel has done to the Palestinian people. When I was a student, I started campaigning for BDS, and I started campaigning because one day I was Googling my university's name, University of Manchester, and Israel, and I came across a partnership they had with an institution called Technion, which is a leading Israeli research and development institute who are partners with Elbit Systems Israel's largest private arms company. I'll go on later to explain more about Elbit Systems. But I also found out that the university was investing millions of pounds into companies like Caterpillar, who supply the Israeli army with bulldozers, which are armored and then used to demolish Palestinian communities, demolish Palestinian schools and homes, in order to make way and build illegal Israeli settlements on the top of the rubble of Palestinian homes. And I was disgusted to find this out, especially since, you know, no one should be paying tuition fees, but we're forced to pay £9,000 tuition fees every year to a university, where I then realized that that money was going directly into funding the destruction of my family's home and other Palestinians every single day. So I went on to start a campaign of boycott, divestment and sanctions there. And it was in 2017, during Israeli Apartheid Week, which myself and other friends in the campaign were helping to organize, including academics at the university. We didn't incur many problems at the start, and then it came to about a week before, and they had issues with one of the speakers, who was Marika Sherwood, a Holocaust survivor, and they basically wanted to censor her. Now, it was quite a while ago, so I'm just summarizing. But later on, we went and found out, I sent in freedom of information requests to the university. And I asked for information relating to any correspondence between the university leadership and about Israeli Apartheid Week. And they refused to give out the information. So I went to the Information Commission Office, which governs the Freedom of Information Act. And after 6 months, they agreed that they would issue a decision notice to the university, which meant if they didn't release the information, they would be held in contempt of court. So finally, 6 months later, the information came out. And it turned out that the Vice Chancellor of the university, Nancy Rothwell, had a meeting with the Israeli embassy the day before they started including all of these conditions, including to censor a Holocaust survivor. And in that, of course, they used the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. So this was a university who refused to meet with myself or other students on their campus. In fact, the vast majority of students on the University of Manchester campus supported BDS, and they wouldn't meet with us, but they were happy to meet with a foreign embassy to discuss censoring our events on campus. Now, I did some more research into Nancy Rothwell, and actually when she became Vice Chancellor of the University of Manchester in 2010, one of the very first things she did was go on a trip to Israel to meet with Israeli universities to find out how they could partner up the University of Manchester with Israeli universities, of which there are numerous ties to this day. They did eventually finally divest from Caterpillar just last year, which was a great victory, but just one of many more that needs to happen at that university. The reason I'm mentioning this story in particular, because I'm sure people don't need another story about how the Israeli lobby censors us. But Nancy Rothwell then went on to become the head of Russell Group Universities. University of Bristol is included in that. So I'd be very interested to find out if there was any connections between Nancy Rothwell and what's happened to Professor David Miller. After I graduated from being a student, I'd gone on to do national campaigning for boycotts, divestment and sanctions. And I was also active in the Labour Party, mostly and only because of Jeremy Corbyn, as I'm sure it's the same for many of us here who were involved in that, because we saw hope, we saw that it could be a vehicle of change. And many people, myself included, had campaigned for an arms embargo to be on the Labour manifesto in 2019. And it was the first time ever that any major party had an arms embargo between the UK and Israel on their manifesto. And it felt as if things were moving up. Unfortunately, we all know what happened to Jeremy Corbyn. And that's why myself and many others went on to find Palestine Action, which is a direct action group which takes on Israel's largest private arms company And the reason we did that is because we were sick and tired of appealing to the same politicians, to the same government, and to the same institutions who were doing nothing to acknowledge what was happening and continue to be complicit in Israel's apartheid regime. And they continue to do so because persuasion and information alone, we know the truth is on our side. We know we have the facts. And really, if it was down to that and international law, then we wouldn't have to be sat here talking on this meeting today. But we are, because there's bigger things involved. There's profit involved, etc. And when it comes down to that, then it comes to the people to take action, to stop companies like Elbit Systems. Elbit Systems is Israel's largest private arms company, who have 10 sites here in the UK. And they literally market their weapons as battle tested on the captive population of Gaza, where millions of people are stuck in what's known as one of the world's most densely populated areas on earth, where the majority of people there are children and the majority are refugees who've been displaced from other parts of Palestine. And while they're trapped under this brutal blockade imposed by Israel, they continue to face bombardment and surveillance by drones. And when they're attacking Palestinians in Gaza, not only are they doing this to ethnically cleanse Palestinians, but they're doing this so that they can literally market their weapons on an international scale as tested. Because what other country has that power to literally say they have a captive population of people where they can test their weapons on? Israel's apartheid regime is based on the domination and control of the Palestinian people, which means they have to have technology in place, which means that they can export it to other oppressive regimes across the world, including to be used against the people of Kashmir, just to name one example. And these weapons are being built here on our doorsteps. So to start off Palestine Action, a few of us just stormed into the headquarters of Israel's largest arms company, spray painted the walls, and we came back the next week and we kept coming back. And many people started to join us. And it was only 4 weeks into the launch of Palestine Action when there was a meeting between the Israeli Ministry of Strategic Affairs, Dominic Raab, and Benny Gantz. And to be honest with you, I was quite happy to find out about this meeting, because I thought, well, if they're talking about us, then it means that they're, truly scared of the power that people have if you take direct action to stop these arms manufacturers on our doorstep. But soon after that followed a series of intimidation tactics by the state, to say the least. This included myself and Richard Barnard being stopped on the border under counter-terrorism, as has been mentioned before. We were interrogated for several hours. We had our devices taken away from us, and we were detained because I refused to give my laptop password over to the state to use against me. They later took our passports completely unlawfully, continued to raid us, and every single fundraising platform we ever made was taken down, and we found out this was because of Elbit's lawyers, and the list can go on. But the point I'm trying to make on this is that the way that they try and work in order to intimidate us and stop us from acting in solidarity with the Palestinian people is by exceptionalizing a few people, including myself and others, and put us in horrific situations. Just last week, I found out I was being charged with blackmail, which, if successful, would mean I face many years in prison for campaigning against Elbit Systems. But they do this in order to intimidate all of us. They try and use a few of us to set an example in order to install that fear into every single one of us to not act for the Palestinian people. But they wouldn't have to resort to tactics like this if they were not so scared of the power we have, of the truth that is on our side, and the ability we have to create change. So my message to conclude my bit to the speech is that we should never let them win. We should never allow them to install that fear in us. Instead, we should react stronger than we ever have done so before. We all have an ability. We all have power. I never realized just how much using my own body and climbing onto the roof of an Israeli arms factory could actually disrupt Israel's arms trade for several weeks, in fact. And that only took 5 to 8 of us at that time. And we have shut down Elbit Systems for over 3 months in just the first year that we have launched, and we're not stopping. But I implore everyone to, yes, join Palestine Action, to stand in solidarity with David Miller, but to know that the only reason they are doing this to us is because they are so scared. They are so scared of the power we have, and they should be the ones who are fearful and not us.
Another round of applause for Huda. Thank you for your amazing courage and principled stand, Huda. So our speakers are now finished, and we're going to invite contributions from the floor. We want to leave some time at the end for responses from the panel, about 20 minutes. So we've got about 20 minutes now for contributions from the floor. So in order that we can fit in as many people as possible, if you could make your response a maximum of 2 minutes, that would be great. So thank you. So please raise your hand if you would like to make a contribution from the floor, or indeed direct a question to the panel that they can then answer a little bit later. So I can see, Jackie, you've got your hand up. Over to you.
Oh, hi, my name is Jackie Walker. I want to go back really to the discussion with Moshé, which I thought was really, really useful, because I think, and I'm speaking both personally and in terms of how I see other activists. And I'm speaking as somebody who has been, as many of you know, the target of some of the most relentless and fierce pressure from this lobby. And I think we really must understand this, not as an issue of racism. Are we anti-Semites or not? Is this anti-Semitic or not? We have to understand this as but another manifestation of the struggle between left and right, between those who want to change the world and those who want to keep it as it is. And I'm saying that because I think a lot of people find this accusation of anti-Semitism very hard to bear. I know it personally, and I know it for other people. But I think we need to flip the way we see this. We need to understand this as the struggle it is. And if you get that, if you understand that, then it doesn't matter what they say to you. You can go on and keep on struggling to speak out and speak often and just keep supporting what is the major battle internationally for equality, and what has become domestically a real struggle, not just for freedom of speech, but for freedom of action and for the survival of the left as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jackie, and thank you for persisting in the struggle with us all. Next, can we go to Elizabeth Liz Lawrence? Liz, would you like to speak now, please? I understand you're from UCU, is that right?
I'm from UCU Left, which is an organisation left in the union. I'm not here in an official UCU capacity.
Yeah, sure.
Left.
Would you like to make a contribution, please? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. So to say UCU Left condemns the dismissal by Bristol University of Professor Miller, we call for his reinstatement. Dismissal of Professor Miller is a threat, has implications for UK academics and for academic freedom, particularly study of the Middle East and research in that area and discussing the rights of the Palestinian people. We note the danger that if Professor Miller's dismissal is not actively resisted, there may well be further attacks on other academics for speaking about the Israeli occupation, about the occupation of Palestinian territory, about the case for a Palestinian state, and so on. So it's a general issue of academic freedom. And also, we will say that there's not explicitly cited in this case. It's important that UCU branches resist the adoption by universities of the IHRA definition, because that is something which threatens academic freedom. And there have been successful campaigns in some universities, such as UCL and Brighton, to not accept that definition. And where that happens, academic freedom and the jobs of academics are safer. So we are here to express our solidarity and best wishes. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Liz. I wonder if you could send that to us in writing. We can publish that if you don't mind. Thank you very much. So the next person with a hand raised I can see is Deepa. Are you right, Deepa? And you're in UCU as well, aren't you?
I am. I'm the NEC member from the Southern region, and I'm very pleased to be here. Well, quite depressed to be here, but on the other hand, very pleased to show my solidarity for David, who is a member within the region. I'm here primarily because as an academic and as a student myself, I relied upon David's work to get an understanding of spin, propaganda, power networks, lobbying, and transparency. To find myself in a position where I am having to defend him for the immense, given the immense expertise that he has, is actually quite terrifying, because it says to you that there are people who are willing to denigrate a lifetime scholarship and cause significant distress, not just to David, but others who work in this area or who may work in allied areas. And the aim, quite rightly, as someone said earlier, is to send a message. And here we're sending a message back. And that message is that this kind of behavior that has been carried out by the University of Bristol has a broader, pernicious effect on well-informed public discourse. This kind of behavior undermines legitimate scholarship and inquiry. And it does so in a way in which this is not the only way it's done. It's also done through anti-terrorism legislation such as PREVENT, casualization, which forces people into positions where they feel they have to research or teach only in areas that are acceptable to management. It stems from political interference in the running of universities. It stems from a marketized culture where academic judgment is undermined in favor of managerial judgment and managerial discretion, often driven by very selective research funding and the commercialization of research. And we see this very clearly right now during the COVID crisis, where the way in which research is funded today is affecting whether the COVID vaccine can be made available to the third world and who's willing, despite these vaccines being developed with huge amounts of public investment, the people who are benefiting are the 1%. And these are things that need to be challenged, not just in the case of David, but in the case of so many across the university sector. Universities cannot come out and say Black Lives Matter and then undermine those whose scholarship brings to light serious colonialism, oppression, and ill treatment. We cannot be asked, as Ghada very, very importantly said, to equate someone's sense of potential distress with years and centuries of oppression, imperialism, and colonialism. We have to stand together to do this, because as academics, we have rights. We have rights for research, we have rights for teaching, but many of these academic freedoms are not well protected. And these freedoms only get protected when we come together and stand together in support of those, in defense of those who are being wrongly accused. And on those very important grounds, I would like not just the single individual who suffers in such cases. When we represent members, we realize the broader community that is affected when somebody with the stature of David and with the family arrangements is affected in this way. And we really don't want to see this happening, so we need to come together. And I urge all branches to pass the motion provided by BRICUP. If you would like to support this motion in your branch, please contact BRICUP and they will be able to give you details. Please bring these motions to your local UCU branch, or indeed in your local trade union branch. Please encourage your trade unions to support those who stand up for the rights of others, those who stand up for the oppressed, those who stand up for the colonized. Thank you.
Thank you, Deepa, for those practical suggestions, and I hope that UCU members will take that up straight away. And we're moving on now to the next person I've got, who is Eldin Fahmy, I think.
Yes, I hope you can hear me okay.
Yeah, sure.
My name's Dr. Eldin Fahmy. I'm a colleague of Professor Miller. I work in the same research centre, the same department as David. Obviously, I'm speaking in a personal capacity and without prejudice to any appeal that might take place. I mean, you know, I have a long-standing personal support and connection with the region, and I want to, you know, firstly to say I very much support David and hope that the university will reconsider. What we're looking at here, I think it's useful to maybe say a little bit more about the wider context in terms of the way that researchers, particularly researchers and academics in the social sciences, are drawn into wider culture wars, into the wider polarization of debates that is arguably facilitated by social media, by the growing sort of, on the one hand, universities want us to engage in public, rightly want us to engage in public debates, but it seems on the other hand, universities aren't necessarily always willing to support their academics when they do speak up and tell the truth as they see it. So, you know, I think that's important in understanding the way that David Miller's work has been attacked. My colleague's work has made an outstanding contribution to critical scholarship, particularly in understanding the role of settler colonial societies in advancing a neoliberal economic agenda globally. And he deserves recognition for that. The university expects our staff to teach based upon the research and scholarship that they do. And it's inevitable, given the nature of my colleague's work, that it will attract controversy. It is inherently political. And so the question of how do universities then respond when people attack that work is exceptionally important. How do universities respond to external political pressure that's applied by a very wide range of actors, very significant political figures across the party political spectrum in Britain, calling for a colleague to be sacked, when the university's own investigation demonstrated that there was no evidence of anti-Semitism, there was no evidence of unlawful speech, and his work has been published on the basis of extensive peer review of the evidence on which Professor Miller makes his arguments. So in that context, the decision to dismiss David Miller, as one of our previous speakers was saying, documents the extent of the pro-Israel lobby's power in influencing the behaviour of British universities. And that has much wider implications for free speech. It has, of course, implications for free speech on Israel and Palestine. I know that many academics, certainly at the University of Bristol, are fearful about speaking out. Certainly many students are fearful about speaking out. We need to consider what are the implications of decisions like this for students of Palestinian heritage, for academics of Palestinian heritage. But this is also, as I started off by saying, this is part of a wider culture war that's being waged by the political right to root out critical voices from UK higher education. They've wanted to do this for decades, and now they feel confident enough to advance that agenda further. And it's critically important, not just in relation to Palestine, but in relation to many other progressive causes, many other emancipatory causes, that we resist that agenda. So I very much hope the university will reconsider, and we need to fight this decision.
Thank you very much, Eldin, for those courageous words. And I'm so sorry to hear that academics are feeling threatened in this way, which is entirely understandable. We have another contribution now from Hisham. Hisham, I understand that you're UE. Welcome. Where are you?
Mute. I think I'm trying to unmute myself. Yes.
Yeah, there you are.
Is that good? Because
yeah, that's good. That's good.
Bristol. Shall we be defending people from the University of Bristol? I'm not sure. Okay. So yeah, well, I just full solidarity with Professor Miller, and thanks to all speakers. I just cannot agree more actually with all what was said. I don't know. I'll deviate a bit. I'll bring about an anecdote. A few days ago, I was chatting with. I'm Hisham, by the way, and I'm a senior lecturer at the University of the West of England. So, and I'm from Hebron in Palestine. So I was talking to a brother of mine the other day who lives and works in Hebron. And there were a few things happening in relation to the Palestinian Authority oppression and assassination of political activists. And I was thinking, he was a social media activist, that one who was assassinated. His name is Nizar Banat. And I was saying, well, I'm actually thinking of leaving my job and starting, to become an activist on social media against the Palestinian Authority. He said, the first thing will happen, I'll be fired. And then you think about the Palestinian Authority as an establishment similar to that of Egypt, and to an extent similar to that of North Korea. And you wonder, does this happen here in Britain? The mother of freedoms and liberties and democracy and stuff like that. I also share the views of Moshé, all of you actually, and that goes beyond Professor Miller. It really is an attack on the space of freedom that nations can exercise. And so this is a serious assault on all of us. And we should, actually, there is a promising experiences, the analogy from some of those sports stars or art stars who come from marginalized minorities, the likes of, for instance, the football player, if you can recall, Paul Pogba, who comes from the outskirts of Paris, black, French, and yet to celebrate whatever he came up with, the Palestinian flag, in solidarity with Palestine. So given that he's got 40 or 50 million supporters on Instagram, whatever that is, then nobody, or at least it was not really cost effective to go against him. And there you go. You mentioned rightly so the underdog concept. We should not allow or accept that universities, what they create, how they contribute in developing societies, in creating the future that we all aspire to have, to be under attack and assault, and to be intimidated. And voices of, just referring to what Professor Miller referred to in one of his lectures when he talked about the pillars of Islamophobia. I just picked this from my bookshelves. I'm sorry.
It's upside down.
Is it?
Yeah, that's better.
This is edited by Benjamin Netanyahu, 1986, which is how the West would be fighting or to win the war against terrorism. And I just want to say, is it secret really that the Israeli funded organizations and institutions are perpetrating or promoting this concept? I'll just quote one little paragraph from page 61. This is the edition of 1986. It says, certain strains of Islam promote an uncompromising interpretation of the faith, which divides the world into Muslim and infidel. Wow, just as other religions, I guess, and enjoins the former to wage unremitting warfare against the latter. So that is the opening of one chapter about what that the terrorism is about. So it's no secret, and I agree with his views that we need to avoid getting, this is my last statement, to avoid getting into force and misleading criticism of things of the likes of the Israeli government. And so celebrating the removal of right-wing leader, war criminal like Benjamin Netanyahu, and celebrating one who comes from the right of that war criminal, like Naftali Bennett. And it's now even the Democrats in the United States are saying, okay, yeah, there is a change in the Israeli government and we should celebrate it. We should go beyond Israeli government. We should go to the Zionism, the concept of racism, upon which the whole concept of Israel has been established. So solidarity, Miller needs support. We in the academia need support. We should not allow this to happen, not to stand and hope for the University of Bristol to reverse its unfair, unjust, and unfortunate decision.
Thank you, Hisham. We'll get that petition circulated around UWE, I'm sure. It's good to hear from UWE. So we're going next to, and we're running out of time, going next to Goldie. Goldie's just messaged. Goldie's from Warwick. Would you like to make your contribution, please, Goldie?
Thank you, Esther. I just wanted to say, really, I don't have anything prepared as such. I just wanted to say thank you, everyone, for all the excellent talks. I just wanted to express full solidarity with Professor David Miller. Not only, I mean, obviously because of the sacking, which is shocking and outrageous, but also because he's been a huge source of support for people like myself. I've actually now been through investigation twice at the University of Warwick. The second one, because of confidentiality issues, I couldn't really speak up about it. But it's not just me. A whole bunch of us at Warwick were complained against. My understanding is there was something like 250 complaints against 30 staff over the last year. So they're already coming for everyone. Somebody put up that Jewish Chronicle article about how they're going to come again, come for us. They've already been coming for us. I know of cases at Birmingham, Leeds, et cetera, and Cambridge, of course, and a lot of places. So I think someone said they are terrified. Of course, they're terrified because we're speaking up. We will not be silenced. And solidarity for Professor Miller, but for all of us who are going to be speaking up. And it was really inspiring to hear Huda and others talking about the Palestine Action Group. I think I'm just heartened to see all the action. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Goldie. It's awful to hear what you're going through, but I'm sure you understand that many people are standing with you, including people here. But thank you for your contribution. I've got two more contributions now, one from Ella and then from Tony. Ella, I think you're from UWE as well, aren't you? And you've got something to say on behalf of Layla. Is that right? Welcome.
Yeah,
Ella.
so there's two of us. We're actually the president and vice president of Students for Justice in Palestine right now. We've just started up the society here at UWE, hasn't had one in a while, so we're doing that. So I'm going to read what she's asked me to write, and then I'm going to share a little something if that's okay. I'll try and keep it as quick and brief as possible. Layla is the president of Students for Justice. We are both journalism students. We're both third years as well at UWE. So she's written, I am a Palestinian American who grew up in the UAE and I studied here in the UK. My relationship to this subject is not one-dimensional. While I've watched this conversation fluctuate throughout the years, the conversation still always seems to end up here, progressive except for Palestine. As Palestinians, we are told that we are wrong, that we haven't experienced our truths. Palestinians are living in a dysmorphia and are not only often forbidden from re-entering their homeland, but silenced by foreign governments for speaking up against the human rights violations of the Israeli government against the people who they are occupying. I've had these conversations. I have had conversations with people where I've chosen not to speak, knowing that my experiences and those of my families will be ignored and refuted. As students, we're taught to be critical of the world around us. Here in this country, people have the freedom to criticize their own government, yet are being penalized for criticizing foreign governments that are breaching international law. Seeing how UAB handled the situation with Professor David Miller is deeply upsetting. We're told higher education is about questioning learning and furthering our minds. But how are we supposed to do that when lecturers' jobs become threatened, especially when they are the lecturers who are encouraging us to do this? And as a result, students are scared to speak their minds. Israel has strong lobbies around the world which are used to prevent people into not voicing their opinion against injustice. Professor Miller is not the only one who has been fired for speaking out against Israel's violence. This is a tactic of Israel. This is a tactic that Israel uses worldwide, especially in academic settings. This is propaganda, which is the exact subject Professor Miller has been teaching about for years. When groups, organizations, or people remove big players in dialogue about Israel's propaganda, such as Miller himself, it becomes an unequal and an incorrect conversation. A conversation where my voice as a Palestinian is not able to participate. Professor Miller is not the only one criticizing Israel. Amnesty International is, Jewish Voices for Peace is, Human Rights Watch is, and the list goes on. And so I am. Lastly, I would like to say that I stand with Professor Miller and commend his actions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, go on. You're going on with your. Okay.
Yeah, that's from Layla. I would just like to share a little something because just contextualize. I am very, very British and very, very white, as in 12th century, as far as I can find from my ancestry. And so I've also written a little something, so we wanted to keep it brief as possible. It says, I was nervous and scared about starting up the society, UE, about Palestine. And I get nervous every time I have to walk through camp, like every time I choose to walk through campus with like a free Palestine sticker or a t-shirt on. And I also find that bringing up the conversation, I always have to take a deep breath and prepare myself. And this has got nothing to do with the color of my skin, my ethnicity, or my nationality. I'm white British. As I said, I'm as British as they come. On top of this, my great-grandparents were part of the British Mandate of Palestine when they moved there. So I am a direct descendant of people who have benefited from the displacement of Palestinians. So why am I nervous and scared of this situation? It's because people use big words to make people fear having big conversations. This is not about religion or culture or race. It's about money, power, capitalism, and nationalistic ideas that benefit some and obliterate others. As a journalism student, I spent the past 2 years being taught to speak up and speak out, that I have the authority and the right to do both of those things. I learned about people who have died for my right to question and criticize, especially under the fourth estate. And when I approach the topic of Palestine here at UE, which I'm spending my entire third year creating all of my assignment pieces around, as a general subject with any of my lecturers or fellow students, I have had the privilege to have been supported, engaged with, and people willing to allow me to use my voice. So this begs the question, if my uni is okay with it, why isn't UOB? We're in the same city, we teach we teach and study similar, if not some of the same topics. We have a crossover industry and we financially support each other. Well, in my personal opinion, it's to do with elitism, power, and money. We're back to talking about a university who did an independent investigation, as we've all heard, that found that there was nothing illegal, problematic with what was discussed. Yet they choose to take action against Professor Miller because he didn't say what they wanted him to say. Only in recent, and I don't know if anybody else knows about this, but only recently in areas of this country, primary school children have been sent home, suspended, and had head teacher meetings because they're discussing Palestine in school. These are children as young as 6 years old. It's clear that the UK is developing a standard of free speech that officially is no longer free. And as a university student, a British citizen, a journalism student, and a staunch supporter of the pro-Palestinian movement, this is a conversation I will consistently be a part of. And I hope that everyone who's listening today will make a step forward to do so as well. And if you're a student at any university, ask around to your lecturers, who can you support, who is being penalized, because there is always going to be somebody, and make your voice heard. You are the one giving the money, so you make a lot of noise if you can. Thank you.
Great points you make, Ella, thank you. And Anita's in the chat has said, make sure you join the Bristol NUJ. Thank you. We're going to squeeze in 2 more people now. Very quickly, Harriet Bradley, you've asked to speak because of the support that you've had from David in the past. Is that right? Do you want to speak now, Harriet?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. We can't see you because we've got a glitch and we can't promote you to the panel. So would you like to speak anyway?
Well, I didn't ask to speak, but I do want to speak because I feel so very angry about this. As a former Bristol student, a former Bristol lecturer and a former Bristol dean, I'm just outraged that the university, which pretends to support freedom of speech and academic freedom, has taken this action against a respected and highly influential lecturer. And it just absolutely indicates to me the appalling situation in which we're in at the moment. And as other speakers have said, the Israeli lobby is really out of control. And unfortunately, both the Conservative Party and the Labour Party have fallen into collusion with the Board of Deputies and their allies. So this is really shameful and worrying. It's really so crucial, and I do hope my colleagues in UCU will take this fight up, that universities do not give in to politics. Universities must be free to do their own thing. And it is clearly the fact, from what I know about this case, because I have been in contact with David and others from the beginning, it is clearly the case that political pressure has been the crunch on this. And I have to say, it's absolutely shocking to know that Caroline Lucas of the Green Party was one of those who signed the letter. I thought she was a decent person, but it just shows the extent to which misunderstandings about the Palestinian cause and the nature of anti-Semitism has become embedded in our political system. It's crucial we fight this. I implore UCU colleagues to take the fight very strongly and support David. I shall be writing more letters, and I hope you all will too, and sign every petition. This is a really important case, not just for David himself, who is a lovely, friendly and excellent guy, and not just for the cause of the Palestinians, as important as it is, but it's also about what universities are about. Universities as places where ideas can be discussed with freedom. Thank you very much, Esther, for letting me speak.
Thank you, Warrior Harriet. And finally, Tony, you can sum up the contributions from the floor, and then we'll go back to the panel. Just a minute or so, please, Tony. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Esther. This has been an excellent meeting in support of David, but it will be to no avail if David is not reinstated. And it's absolutely important that we win this battle. The Jewish Chronicle this week, in its leading article, says the sacking of David Miller should be the beginning, not the end. And it's crucial that the University College Union, which represents lecturers, gets off its backside and actually comes out firmly and clearly against what is happening. And it means that the executive must be bombarded with messages to that effect. And we should take a lead from what happened at Toronto University, where they refused to employ somebody who they'd already agreed a contract with. That university, the University of Toronto, was subject to an academic boycott by every other university, led by the Lecturers' Union. And it gave in, and it reversed its decision. And that is what needs to be done. Bristol University needs to be subject to a boycott so people don't attend conferences, seminars, or anything else at it until it respects academic freedom. Without that, then we will simply have further and further cases like Goldie. And I have to say, I mean, 35 years ago, Union of Jewish Students tried to bar me from speaking at the London School of Economics, and there was a pushback by students there. And in the end, and you can read about it online, BV newspaper, the meeting went ahead with a much larger audience. They can be fought, the Israeli lobby, and they can be defeated. But it does mean that people have to translate the words into action. And first and foremost, that means lecturers actually taking risks. And it means Bristol being put at the centre of this, because there's no doubt whatsoever that when David was cleared of anti-Semitism, that should have been the end of the case. And it's the utter cowardice of Bristol University administration and Sir Hugh Brady, which has led to the sacking. This must be reversed. And we should contrast this with what happened to Kathleen Stock, the Sussex University lecturer, a few days ago, when trans activists called for her sacking. The whole of the press and the university itself said, no, we will resist any attempt to fire a lecturer because of what they say. The same must apply to Bristol University. They talk about cancel culture. Well, this is a prime example
Thanks,
of cancel
Tony.
culture.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. So we've as a clear message there, we need to go on, well, we need to take some sort of direct action. But let's go back to the panel to see what their views are, both of what they've heard from the other panelists and what they've heard from the floor. So conclusions from you all. We haven't got long, but I'd like to hear. We all like to hear what you have to say. So David, would you like to respond, please?
Thanks very much, everyone, for all their contributions and comments. And for the debate that there's been in this meeting, we haven't come to definitive conclusions, I think, on that debate, but it's a debate which I think we need to have more of on the question of the precise role of the Israel lobby and the Zionist movement in British politics and in politics more widely around the world. I mean, I've always been interested in having that debate. It's not, I don't have a settled view on that debate, but I do think that debate has to be conducted in relation to evidence. And as Moshé was talking about, you know, the question of evidence is not just a question of detailed evidence at the coalface or taking your subject of study to determine everything else, but it also is to do with the question of context and with economics and geopolitics and all that kind of thing. And I'm very much in favour of having that debate on the left at a much more adequate and higher level than has thus far been the case. On my own case, yes, this is not just about me. It has had very significant negative effects on me, but it will not stop me. The reason that we got into this place really is because all those years ago I was accused of being an anti-Semite, and I was outraged by that, because as people who know me will know, I'm a lifelong anti-racist, and I go nowhere near confusing Jews with Zionism or condemning Jews as Jews. So I'm going to continue with this work. I will be able to continue with this work, and there's lots of material coming out of this research which perhaps will surprise some of my detractors in the Jewish Chronicle and many other places in the Zionist movement. So I wanted to say, you know, that I sit here having had some significant detriment, but I'm not downhearted and I'm not giving up. I'm, you know, absolutely in this for the long haul. And I know that many other comrades are too. And we have to build a movement which can push back against, as Tony says, the Israel lobby. And again, as he says, it can be done. And we just have to find the ways and the strength and the solidarity to do that. Just to finish off in response, I mean, I wanted to say that this is very much the beginning of the struggle. The Jewish Chronicle is right; it's not the end; it's the beginning. But you know, they think that the beginning of their victory is in sight. On the contrary, I think many of us, all of us in this meeting, probably know that's not the case. That the occupation and the crimes of the Israelis in Palestine will continue to outrage world opinion, and world opinion will become more and more hardened against Israel, as will indeed global Jewish opinion become more and more hardened. It already is becoming more and more hardened against what is sometimes seen as the excesses of the Israeli government. So I want to say that this is a much bigger struggle than me, and it's a struggle which we are winning. We may have defeats along the way. That's the way of things, but we are winning, and we just need to redouble our efforts and to work together in as broad a way and principled way as possible. I'm trying to have comradely debates rather than descending into sectarian feuding, which so far we seem not to have done. So I'm happy and I'm optimistic. I suppose you would expect me to be, but this is the beginning, not the end.
This is the beginning for us. So thank you for those really positive comments, David, and solidarity with you. Over to you now, Moshé, for your closing comments.
Oh, yes, thank you. I just want to make clear why I insist on the idea that it's not just the Zionist lobby or the Israel advocacy groups. They are not the source of the problem, that there's something behind them. It is a strategic question. Ghada can say, yes, I mean, we Palestinians are not concerned with imperialism. We are suffering from Zionism. That's true. I've spent most of my life fighting against the Zionist colonization project. But look how it all started. Can you relate to Zionism without going back to the Balfour Declaration? And what is the Balfour Declaration if not British imperialism and Zionism aiding each other? They are colluding, but which is who is using who? They were both using each other, of course, but which is the more powerful partner in this? And similarly today, it is a strategic mistake to hope that in our struggle, in this case of David Miller and in the wider case, we should look for help and sustenance from the establishment, let alone from American imperialism. Some Palestinians have blundered badly in that they expected to get support from the United States. It has been mentioned here, the role of the Palestinian Authority and so on. But if you look at the root of this, the strategic blunder was that they expected the United States to help them. Okay, so our hope, our strategic decision should be not to look for help from the British establishment or from its big master, the United States, but from grassroots public opinion.
Yeah.
And in this arena, it is true we are winning. We cannot win over the establishment. We can block their wickedness. We can block their strategy by strengthening our position in public opinion, where we are indeed in the process of winning.
Thank you, Moshé. It's back to the grassroots as always. Natalie, are you there?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everybody. I think so many important contributions made this evening, and what really has been underscored and what all academic students, actually people in general, need to understand is where we end up if they don't speak out. Whilst we're in a situation where we are, where people are fearful of the accusations, they can pick off people one by one. And that's why solidarity is so important. And one of the things I think we need to do is to support people in showing that solidarity, to equipping them to be able to do that. As others are quite rightly mentioned, this is a battle against the ruling classes to maintain hegemony and control of resources. And I would say it really is a fight for our very survival as communities. And so I just think that people need to, just really take to heart where we end up if we don't find that courage. And actually, I'll always go back to the Palestinians to learn to demonstrate that summud, that steadfastness, because that's what gets us through this situation. So thank you so much to everybody.
Thank you very, very much, Natalie, for your contribution. I don't know whether we can hear Ghada. Ghada, did you want to make some closing comments?
Well, first of all, thanks to everybody who's made some really excellent points. Thanks to David, of course, for being steadfast and continuing to be steadfast. By the way, I was a student at Bristol University myself. So anyway, no, the point really, I suppose what a small point I wanted to make is that it's very, very, no matter how this has arisen, it's extremely important to prevent the dismissal of David being permanent. We must reinstate him. It's absolutely crucial because this is a test case and it will dictate the way things happen from now on. One small idea I want to throw in is that there ought to be a campaign on social media to get the message about Bristol University to prospective students, to get them to think twice about going to study at Bristol University. I think if there was a strong movement amongst students fearful or reluctant to go to Bristol, that would have a hell of an effect on the university authorities. And we need somebody to do that.
Thank you, Radha. That's a really good point. Yeah, we'll pick up that, and we've got lots of suggestions in the chat as well that we'll need to digest and consider. Finally, over to you, Huda. You've got the final say.
Thanks, and it was great to hear from everyone. And I just want to echo what Moshé said about the British establishment. It's completely true. We can't appeal to the establishment, especially the British establishment, who, as you mentioned, have been complicit in Israel's apartheid regime since the Balfour Declaration, which is over 100 years ago, to make the changes that we want to see. We have to take the power into our own hands. And to Natalie for mentioning the resistance of the Palestinian people. I know some people mentioned about fear in the contributions, but just to echo that, you know, whatever happens to us, they can never match what happens to Palestinians every day in our name. And as people in Britain, we have an obligation and responsibility to act on that and to end that complicity, because we would hope that if things were the other way around, we would be doing that other people would do the same for us. And to David Miller, again, I said in full solidarity with you. And I think often in these types of situations, the best thing to do is to make the backlash against the university for sacking David Miller so great that they would never dare to do it again, or to any other university. And that requires all of us to voice our support for David Miller, but to actually turn that into actions. And I understand this isn't the forum to decide on exactly what that's going to be, but if there's anything I know about campaigning, it's that the backlash against what they do to us has to be much greater, and to also understand that we are fighting against something which is so great. We're fighting against, you know, the Israel lobby. We're fighting against British complicity with Israel's apartheid regime. And on the path to win that, there are going to be many obstacles and people who are put in horrible situations. But it's a fight that we have to conquer those obstacles in order to win in the end and to achieve freedom for the Palestinian people.
Thank you, Huda. Solidarity and thanks to you. So we've reached the end of the meeting now. We will be passing around details of petition and letters that we've already described, and we are planning a real live meeting based on the discussion today. We'll be holding a protest about the university too, so we'll start to put together plans with that, and we'll be in touch shortly. And thank you very much to all of our panelists for joining the meeting today and supporting David, and to David too, and to the contributors, and indeed to everyone who contributed in the chat. So thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Solidarity.